When teaching English parts of speech, a popular mnemonic for the coordinating conjunctions is fanboys, for, and, nor, but, or, yet, and so. Of these 7, nor might be the one that seems like the outlier given its very contextual use cases, but the one that gets me is for. In this context, for, much like since, as, given that, due to the fact that, and see and as is a synonym for because. It describes causation, reason. The thing that sets it apart is that those other examples are all subordinating conjunctions, while for is a coordinating conjunction, i.e. it's one that links to independent clauses. If we want to be utilitarian about it, we can say you'd put for between two independent clauses to link them, rather than attaching it to one of the clauses to make it dependent, aka subordinate, to the other. For example, with a subordinator you could say, my hair got wet because I forgot my umbrella, or because I forgot my umbrella, my hair got wet. With a coordinator, you could say, my hair got wet for I forgot my umbrella, but you couldn't say, for I forgot my umbrella, my hair got wet. It just doesn't work. It doesn't make sense. It's not accepted. If you're new to the whole sentence structure thing, it might help to conceive of the coordinator as contextualizing the relationship of the two clauses that surround it, while the subordinator affixes to one clause like a parasite to contextualize its relationship to the other in terms of both grammar and meaning. It's a little more complicated than that, but don't worry about it. For is also a preposition, and like every other preposition, it means about 30 different things. In the context of being a preposition, for signifies relationships not only of purpose and motivation, but also of substitution and favor and direction and, yes, causation, among other things. The prepositional use of for is significantly more common than the conjunctive use and in fact predates it. The coordinating for is thought to have spun out of the prepositional for being used in phrases that mean in one way or another for the reason that. And that leads us to my yelling at cloud moment. Who the fuck is using the coordinating for? It feels outdated, not so much so that its dictionary entries would have archaic or obsolete appended onto them. We're hardly talking about Scythens here, but maybe they should be appended with like fantasy LARP or something. The coordinating for works great in Shakespeare or prayers or whatever, but it is not natural in everyday conversation and also most other contexts. It just doesn't gel. Try composing a sentence with the coordinating for. You won't like what it does to you. I'm going to bed because I'm tired versus I'm going to bed for I'm tired. See, the presence of for even changes the way I feel I'm supposed to inflect the sentence. Suddenly, I'm not even speaking anymore. I'm spellcasting, I'm conjuring. The coordinating for is for shit like Lord of the Rings. That's like 2 minutes into the first movie. You know, some people go on spiels like, why are swear words inappropriate? They're literally just words. And the answer is that that's what swearing is for. Vulgarity as a form of expression runs in tandem with the existence of vulgar words. Fuck is inappropriate because fuck is supposed to be inappropriate, and it seems the coordinating for is supposed to make you sound like the town crier. It's supposed to make you sound like a magistrate orating the newest regulations for wig powder and state-mandated celibacy, and that is where you'll see the majority of coordinating fors on a day-to-day basis, fantasy stories. Now, that's hardly exclusive. Judith Butler uses it. Judith Butler is also the type to just say phantasmatic like it's nothing. Joe Biden uses it.
So many of us. For we are fundamentally a people.
Whoa there, tough guy. And I know exactly what you're thinking. Both of these examples have the same initials. Well, you know who else uses it? Mitski. Are you gonna pick a fight with Mitski? I'm not. I'm not even gonna play the audio, for I do not wish to be copyright claimed. So just look at the lyrics. Will genius lyrics be wrong about something? Mitski can get away with anything though. She makes it all sound effortless. It appears in other places too. Martin Luther King Jr. used it, for example.
We know how it's coming out. For when people get caught up with that which is right and they are willing to sacrifice for it.
He made it work. I think that's due in no small part to the fact that he was a preacher, granting each statement its requisite weight. I've seen it on rare occasions in journal articles as well, and sometimes in memes, but mostly in fantasy movies and other things that try to sound old-timey and fancy. These examples are deliberately from very different contexts. Do you see the common thread though? Based purely on my own exposure to the coordinating for, I feel that its tone is not quite antiquation, but almost affected antiquation. It comes off as an invocation of some distantly dreamed formality. You have this idea of the higher register, that is a manner of language that you might use when attempting successfully or otherwise to sound classy, formal, or educated. The coordinating 4 is that and more. The coordinating 4 is a token of supposed grandeur. It's for signifying poetry and lending a putative weight. There's an effect that is almost mythologizing. It calls to mind the romantic and the legendary. It slots into the general gravitas of King's rhetoric. Its use in fantasy reinforces the sense of antiquity and nobility, and Biden seems to use it for an almost mythic recounting of the present. Very few attempts actually stick the landing. If you haven't established that weight, that mode of speaking, it just kind of feels like a sucker punch. And the telos of signification is so often simplification. Try telling someone they can or can't do something. The apostrophe's a guillotine, the T just slides off like a French nobleman's head, the glottal stop lurking on the sidelines like a parasitic jack-o'-lantern waiting to hop in. When we use the word in general speech, i.e. as a preposition, we tend not to say it like the stressed for, but rather like the unstressed fur, right? For example, I just did it right there. And I think if you're gonna bring that unstressed pronunciation to the coordinating 4, you're gonna come across like Shakespeare productions that try desperately to make everything sound modern without changing any dialogue. And what I'm getting at here is that in light of all that, why is it in the mnemonic? Why is it the first thing in the mnemonic? Like, when you really sit down and look at it, ignoring nor for the time being, it's like, here's your handy guide for remembering the coordinating conjunctions. It has 5 of the most useful and common words in the English language, and also a word you'll never use outside of your canon-compliant Othello ex Iago /fic. The consideration of the word for here is detached from its actual use cases. It's true that it's a coordinating conjunction and we don't exactly have a ton of those, but from the perspective of education, is it fair to give the impression that for is every bit as useful as all these other words? What happens in the classroom? Do you take the students through each conjunction just to say, oh, by the way, don't use for or you'll sound like a pretentious wizard? It's like opening a door just to say not to go through it. A similar door is opened by nor. As soon as you tell a student that they can use nor the same way that they would use and, but, and or, they will try to use it that way, and then you'll have to explain to them why they actually have to word it differently and leave them wondering why you brought it up in the first place. And it'd be fine if you actually explained it from the get-go, but I've never seen a single piece of Fanboy's educational material that actually does. Returning to for, I also worry that it'd create confusion, invoking a situational conjunctive meaning of a word that sees much more common use as a preposition with different meanings. If its inclusion in the mnemonic is truly purely about completeness, then why not throw in only? How about and or fucking else if? And there are other legitimate criticisms of Fanboys as a mnemonic, particularly that its constituent words aren't really as equivalent as their cohabitation might suggest. For and so are not commutative, and there's not even a complete consensus on whether they're even coordinators at all, or if they're actually subordinators, or even conjunctive adverbs. I don't want for to be a conjunctive adverb. The thought of seeing it next to a semicolon is giving me pneumonia. Per the Cambridge Grammar of the English Language, for lacks most of the properties distinguishing prototypical coordinators from prepositions with clausal complements. God, drag the bitch. But I gotta be honest, the funniest thing to me about Fanboys is looking at all these different resources on the mnemonic and seeing how they grapple between just presenting the coordinating for like it's normal and sheepishly acknowledging that it feels a little bit off. And I keep thinking, where does this even come from? The word fanboy in reference to a specific type of geek or nerd traces back to at least the 70s. There's a single print appearance of it from 1918, though whether that is connected to the modern usage is contested. It later entered the mainstream in the 80s and 90s, at which time it occupied a complicated flux of self-recognition and disapproval. The attempts to hunt down the origin of the mnemonic fanboys have been many. Noteworthy is that fanboys is often brought up specifically in reference to punctuation, i.e. in the sense of putting a comma before the conjunction. A 2007 Blogspot post by Brett Reynolds traces something akin to the mnemonic to William Strunk's famous, now century-old Elements of Style. Strunk's comma rule was for and, nor, but, or, while, and as. I hope he was okay. Carl Hagen's 2009 blog post, Comma Fanboys, posits that the earliest print acknowledgement of the mnemonic is in the 1951 book Learning to Write, which implies that it was already a well-established term. Hagen notes that the mnemonic didn't gain serious traction till the 90s, and it took off in the 2000s once the word fanboy had gone mainstream. So it's impossible to verify who initiated fanboys or why, but ultimately none of this really matters. This is a largely meaningless subject, and even if someone were to be misinformed about it, it's an extremely easy thing to unlearn. But I think it's fascinating that this word's treatment is so detached from its actual usage. My copy of the Gregg reference manual keeps referring to the coordinators as and, but, or, and nor, and occasionally for, so, and yet. And I'm not entirely sure what it's trying to say. Like, I get that it is separating the prototypical coordinators from the others, but it's not doing this in a grammatical context where that distinction matters. And when you're saying occasionally, like, is this to suggest that you think nor as a coordinating conjunction is seeing more everyday usage than so? I feel nauseous. There's a 2010 Technologizer article by Harry McCracken on the origin of the term fanboy. That is, the geek one, the nerd one. The word fanboy had entered the Merriam-Webster dictionary 2 years prior, and as McCracken notes, its definition of a boy who is an enthusiastic devotee glosses over the word's connotations and use cases, not the least of which being the implication of immaturity as an insult. And wow, hey, that's kind of familiar. An apparent inability not only to keep up with slang, but to even understand how people talk and use words in the first place. That's kind of a problem with grammar resources in general. They're very helpful, but usage notes can never really be extensive enough. There is something funny about the woeful inability of dictionaries to fulfill this role, be it noting how to interpret fanboy or when not to say for. It's almost like folk knowledge, an open secret, and that is echoic of lexical priming, the notion that our brains are primed through exposure to expect certain words to come after others, to see certain word combinations as more correct. I'll illustrate what I mean with a little scenario for the geeks and gamers in the crowd. A frail old man asks you to unambiguously define schmoovin, run, and pog. He wants you to be extremely clear about how, when, and why to use each phrase. He's also on life support and has 5 minutes to live. This is his last wish. Are you up to the task? Anyway, I think that we know that outside of telling a joke, saying, "I told her to leave for I was very tired," just sounds unhinged. So why include it in educational material? And you can wax about determinism all you like. You could say that if a substantial number of people accept a rule of the language, that rule will simply become true. And on that note, I do feel that hair splitting over whether or not so is actually a coordinator is an extremely dumb hill to die on. But while I don't know to what extent fanboys is being accepted, what I can say is I have not noticed any use of the coordinating for in my day-to-day life, like at all. Clearly, what we need is realpolitik, but for grammar. And my little tinfoil theory is that the acronym, the mnemonic, is being served by the conjunctions, not the other way around. It sounds nice, it's simple and easy to remember. Suppose you take out for, and also nor, just for good measure. What do you do with the rest of the letters? Soiba? Yabso? Or God forbid, ass boy? You need to let for stay or else you don't get your fun mnemonic. So you just have to pretend that it's not exclusively a word for elves and sorcerers. That's not to say that this is all some big conspiracy by Big Grammar or whatever, more so that I think it's a long chain of quiet acceptance for the sake of convenience. A nice clean mnemonic probably looks real good on the curriculum, and I don't think I can fault anyone for that. Just to restate, none of this matters. years. To wrap up, when you're looking to understand a language or a model of communication, some people will tell you that the true meaning of a language is coded into its words, and other people will tell you that the meaning is somewhere else, in the content, the context, the inflection, the medium, the causation. But there's this mental image that I have not really been able to shake. The thought that meaning is beneath the words, between the letter and the paper. And when I say the letter, I'm not talking about the ink that prints it, I mean the grapheme. Meaning does operate in 3 dimensions and above, but it isn't constrained in this rough and fleshy physicality. I think it lurks underneath your voice, and it shyly peeks from behind letters on the screen, in that lawless space between the black text and the white background that no style sheet, cascading or otherwise, can ordinate. And I have this image of prying back the text without revealing the space underneath it, and instead exposing some kind of truth waiting to welcome us, to extend feathery coils and wrap itself under our skin and between our bones and make something of us. Thanks for watching. You can catch me on Twitter and Tumblr. Get ready for my next video where the target will be the subjunctive. You're not going to want to miss my next video. I have some things to say about polarity items. Join me next time for a comprehensive debunking of the word as. In my next video, I will be ranking the conjunctive adverbs from most to least sexual. In the next installment, I will be revising the internet to remove all semicolons.